just because we have a lot of ground to cover, but I will be here till midnight if need be to make sure that everyone that wants to testify is able to do so. So we're going to get started in just a minute, and apologies to people who haven't yet entered the room. It's going to be really tight. There is an overflow room to the right. There is no television, and we apologize for that. As you know, the chamber's under renovations, which is why we're here today.
It's really hard to distill everything into like 2 minutes, you know. So, but I think I have a feel for what they're concerned. It's great that she's doing that. Just wanted to say hi. I'm Maria Morelli, town of Brookline. So nice to meet you. So glad you could come. It's my pleasure. I wouldn't miss this.
Hi, how are you? Do you want to? All right. I got the arrivals. All right. Good afternoon and welcome to the Winter Chamber at 26 Court Street. My name is Matt O'Malley. I'm proud, thank you, to be the District 6 City Councillor and the Chairman of the Committee on Environment and Sustainability. We are here today to discuss docket number 1063, an order authorizing the City of Boston to adopt community choice energy. This matter was sponsored by myself as well as Council President Michelle Wu. This is something that we've been, just for an overview for the timeline, the Council President and I initially filed a hearing order on January 25th. On March 30th, we met with Eversource's account executives. On April 4th, we met with the Attorney General's office. On April 20th, we met with Eversource's supply specialists. On April 25th, we held a working session, and then 2 months or a month and a half ago, on August 2nd, 2 months ago, I guess, we filed this authorization order, which brings us to the hearing before us today. As mentioned, this is an issue that has a tremendous amount of interest, and just so you know, we are going to have two panels. We first have our panel of experts that I will introduce shortly. Afterwards, we'll have a panel from the administration with Austin Blackman, the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space. And then we are going to open it up for public testimony afterwards. We're going to ask every member of the public to limit their comments to 2 minutes. We have a lot of people who wish to speak, so let's please be respectful of that. I'm delighted to be joined, obviously, by the co-sponsor and Council President Michelle Wu, as well as by the order of their parents, Josh Zakum, Sal Lamatina, Anissa Asabi-George, Mark Siomo. I know that Councilor Flaherty was here earlier and did have to leave, but wanted to come by to show his support. And I will give a brief opening statement before I turn it over to the co-sponsor, simply to say thank you to all who have helped us get to this point. I look around this chamber, which I've only been on the other side of the table testifying at school committees. I've never seen such an incredible group. I apologize again that we are using this room as opposed to the Ionella chamber, but we are making it more usable for everybody, so there have been some sort of delayed renovations happening there. But nevertheless, to see the incredible men and women of the city who've come out to support community choice and what it can mean. There is an utter lack of leadership happening in Washington, D.C. as it relates to climate change and what we need to do. And it is up to cities and towns to really lead the way, and I'm proud to count myself an environmentalist alongside so many of you on the efforts that we're going to put forward, and this is an absolutely key piece. We've seen this work tremendously successfully in 150 of 351 cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth. We know that there are some tools and some mechanisms in place to protect ratepayers, while we can also grow our renewable energy sources for our energy by 5%, which will have an incredible impact. We are lucky in this city that by sheer luck, the last several weather events that made their way up here occurred when they did. Had they occurred, Superstorm Sandy, for example, had it occurred during high tide, which would have been 3 or 4 hours earlier or later, we would have seen devastation. Before this year, 2 Category 4 hurricanes did not hit the United States in the same calendar year. We've had 3 in a month. And despite one's take on climate change and the effects, no one, absolutely no one can dispute the fact that climate change has a direct correlation with these weather events. There's a whole host of things that we need to do, but I can think of nothing more important and more impactful immediately than when we enter into community choice aggregation or community choice energy. And you have my word, we are going to continue to fight for this. It's the best thing for the city, it's the best thing for the environment, and it can be the best thing for the ratepayers as well. So thank you all for your support, for being here. Thank you for the claps, but in the expediency, we'll do the silent fingers, please. For brief opening statements from my colleagues in a minute, but I did want to ask the council president and the co-sponsor of this for any opening thoughts she had.
Thank you, Mr.
Unfortunately, no. We thought it was, and it turns out it will not, so I apologize for that. I'm sorry.
If anyone had a laptop, though, hooked up to the internet or Wi-Fi, we could at least get that set up. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know. I'm sure Carrie has thought through every possibility, but it is streaming live on the internet, so even if that TV isn't plugged into this feed.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and thank you everyone for taking the time to be here. I think the line is still out the door as people are signing in to testify and to come and participate. I am really excited about this. As Matt laid out, it's been a long process. We've had many, many meetings backed up by great research from advocates in this room and some of the regulators at other levels of government, from industry and all around. So I feel very confident that this is a well-researched proposal before the City Council and before the City of Boston. You know, I don't need to get into why climate change is real and why it matters that we do what we can now. You just have to turn on the TV, talk to folks in Boston who are still reeling and watching what's happening in Puerto Rico and other parts of the country. Boston is a coastal city, and the impacts are here. They're going to continue to come, and the neighborhoods, the people, the communities who will be most affected are disproportionately lower income residents, people of color, our most vulnerable residents who can't afford to fly out of the area when the storm comes or retreat to their second home or even drive away in some cases. So we're talking about a social justice issue and a public health issue as well as an economic issue. And I'm really excited that our proposal puts that sort of triple bottom line, as I know as Councillor Malley likes to call it, before the city. This is something that will help the environment. This is something that will help public health. This is something that will help us tap into the fastest growing areas of job growth in the country, in industries around clean energy. And it democratizes our energy policy down to the local level where we can have the most direct influence. So I'm really excited at all the advocates who are here before us to testify. Thank you so much to the administration for your partnership and for all of the due diligence and back and forth. I may be standing up and walking around a little bit, as Cass will determine. He's just a few weeks shy of being old enough for daycare. And I saw there's another baby in the room as well, and some young folks here. So, I mean, we're all in this room because we know this is what it's about. I see mothers and fathers and grandparents and aunts and uncles and friends and caretakers. We are here for the next generation, and we're here to make sure that we're passing on a better Boston for them. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Council President Wu. Again, let's focus on these. We've been joined by at-large City Councilor Ayanna Presley. Councilor Josh Sakam, any opening thoughts?
I'll be very brief. I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Council President for sponsoring this. I think if we're in a position where we can make a significant impact on climate change, against climate change, with either no or minimal costs to us, the ratepayers, it's a high time that we did it. I look forward to supporting this measure when it moves forward, and thank you again for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Councilor Sakam. Councilor Sal LaMartina.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm here to listen and to learn, and thank you for all you being here.
Thank you, Councilor Lamatina. Councilor Nisa Asabi George.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to yourself and Councilor Wu for bringing this before us and really for me providing quite an education around this topic, as well to the advocates who have spent some time with me teaching me about community choice and the benefits it would bring to our residents in the city.
Thank you, Councilor Asabi George. Councilor Marxiomo.
Thank you. I just wanted to also commend the authors of this and look forward to supporting it when we bring it to the floor. Unfortunately, I do have to leave in about 20 minutes, but I'm here to participate up until then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Councilor Ayanna Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just lend my voice to the chorus here, thanking you and Council President Wu for your leadership, for your hard work, and your efforts to educate this body and many others on this important matter. Both of you continue to lead in this space. Someone asked me coming in how things are going, and I said, well, we're trying to resist while progressing. And so, that's actually what's happening here, staving off and addressing the lack of leadership on the federal level and making sure that we continue to advance and progress forward. So I thank you both for your leadership. Was proud to be an early supporter of this and look forward to the hearing.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Presley. So once again, there are two panels. The first are some of our experts and some of the incredible leaders who have helped us get to this point. I wanted to make two quick corrections. One, I think I misspoke earlier. There are 127 of 351 towns throughout the Commonwealth that participate in community choice. We also have letters in support which will be added to the record in support of this initiative from the Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Council, Arbor Way Coalition, Boston Ward 4 Democratic Committee, the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay, Charlestown Neighborhood Council, Clam Point Civic Association, as well as Green Justice Coalition, 350.org, Alternatives, ACE, Alternatives for Community Environment, Boston Clean Energy Coalition, BCAN, Boston Student Advisory Council, CPA, Chinese Progressive Association, Community Labor United, Greening Rossi, Mothers Out Front, Rosendale Affinity Group, Sierra Club of Massachusetts, and West Roxbury Saves Energy. So our first panel of experts, we have Maria Morelli, resident of Jamaica Plain, a planner for the town of Brookline, Mike Prokosh from the Boston Climate Action Network, Kalila Barnett from the Green Justice Coalition, and Dr. Liz Stanton, Director of Applied Economics Clinics at Tufts University. If you just wanted to begin, a quick opening statement and introduce yourself, and then we'll get right into it. Please, Maria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Council President Wu and members of the City Council. I'm glad to be here. I am a senior planner for the town of Brookline, which launched its aggregation program this past July. I manage climate action initiatives for the town, and I was involved in developing the program with our energy broker, Good Energy, and a citizen committee. So I've been involved in every aspect of the bidding process, the development of the plan, administering the program, as well as outreach. As Mr. Chairman stated, I'm a JP resident. Actually, Councilor O'Malley is my district rep. I'm also a 10-year board member of a neighborhood group, although I am here speaking in my professional capacity to address any concerns you might have. I do commend you for bringing this before the citizens and business owners in Boston. I also do admire the work the city is doing regarding climate action. I work really closely with my counterparts at City Hall, and we have a great partnership that I would like to continue and also reciprocate in any way that I can. I respect any reservation or concern that the administration or members of the City Council might have about a program like this. It is a big deal. But I do want to emphasize, as someone who's been involved in every aspect of administering the program, that launching a community choice aggregation program is not a matter of either or. It's not an either or proposition if you're for or against. And what I mean by that is that anything that is worthwhile, that has a worthwhile impact, is going to involve challenges that can be mitigated. Unless the city is authorized to launch the program, you're not going to be able to study what those challenges are. You're not going to be able to understand that there are ways, real ways, to mitigate those challenges. You also won't know what consumer needs are. If you think that consumers are simply concerned about cost, I can tell you personally, my work brings me in direct contact with the most vulnerable populations in Brookline, and they are much more concerned with not just cost, the quality of their air quality, and also the opportunity to have access to clean choice. It shouldn't be just a luxury that elite classes have. And also losing out, there are benefits to this program, and losing out on those benefits is really the biggest risk of all. In addition, on a more practical note, it takes time to develop an aggregation plan. There are consumers that are learning more about this. They are bombarded daily with solicitations from third-party suppliers, renewable energy companies. There are more constituency groups that are learning about CCA, and there are more communities coming online. So saying no is really is something that has to be justified, and it's getting harder to justify when you have people coming before you asking why. If you decide to launch, it takes at least a year and a half to execute that plan. It's not something that can be done overnight. And as we know, the energy market doesn't stand still. You want to be prepared to take advantage of those opportunities. And further, I just want to remind you that Boston is not just a regional leader, but a leader internationally. Boston is a member of the C40 Climate Leadership Group, which is 4 megacities. Anything that Boston decides to support or decides to reject is going to have a lot of attention. It's going to have a lot of influence, and it's not something that no is not going to go away. It does need to be spoken to. So closer to home, why did Brookline do this? You might know that we have a town meeting form of government, and Aggregation Plus was actually brought forth by citizen petitioners. So it's literally for and by the people. And this particular program that we have a lot of attention for our default program, which is 25% more renewable energy than the state mandates. But we actually have 3 products in our program, and that was directly in response to what consumers were telling the town. We've had people who've come forth and say that there are solicitations that they're bombarded with. They do not have the time to vet these companies. This is a role that the town has taken on. A little bit more about, we enjoy a 92% participation rate in our program, and the majority of the participants are in our 25% product. Okay, and what does that mean? It actually helps Brookline displace almost 30 million pounds of polluting carbon dioxide emissions annually, and that translates to installing and running about 12 wind turbines. So if you think about it, the ingenuity behind community choice aggregation is that everyone, every household, every small business can contribute a little bit more. We don't have to have extreme outliers doing 100% renewable energy to have this kind of impact. If Boston were to sign on about 125,000 participants, you could beat us. We do enjoy a friendly rivalry, but you could help Boston displace almost 38 million pounds of polluting carbon dioxide emissions with just your 5% product, just to let you know the magnitude. A couple of other reasons why, like Boston, we have signed on to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2050. Okay, we have a near-term target in 2 years of 2020 to see how well we're getting there. At the rate we're all going, at the state is going, we're not going to meet our target. So we need something that will have as much impact as possible, and nothing we can do will have this amount of impact to this magnitude. I talked to you about the solicitations. We have an active senior population that really has appealed to us to vet plans, and through an aggregation plan, we're actually providing a consumer service to our more vulnerable populations. In terms of our philosophy of how to combat climate change, it's not just energy efficiency, but as I mentioned, it's reducing greenhouse gas emissions that we have to take on. So we might think of natural gas as being a cleaner resource. Actually, that's a euphemism. It's still a dirty fuel. and it contributes to carbon pollution. So we do need to think about not just cleaner choices, but clean fuels that are available. What we're actually sending a message through this program is that utility companies which have invented the game, which do have all the leverage and can negotiate for prices, they have not provided a range of renewable energy options that people want. Right now, it is a bit like organic food. There is a bit of a premium attached to it, and we're proud to say that we do make it more accessible for folks to purchase greener options. Our 25% product, if we were to look at a household consuming about 600 kilowatt hours per month, they're paying about $2 to $3 more than what Eversource's basic services provide. Not many people can buy a cup of coffee for that additional amount, but yet have the same impact on the environment that the program will have. The other thing I want to say is that it's important not to underestimate constituents. The people I have met with face-to-face certainly do express a concern about costs, and that's why we do have a product in the program that is meant to actually beat Eversource's prices. But keep in mind that people do want more options for renewable energy. They can't install solar panels. Again, for that maybe that $2 more a month, which is tax deductible, they can have a huge impact. And moreover, they can vote with their electric bill. They can send a message to decision makers and utility companies that they want better products that meet their needs. So essentially, we're empowering folks. My experience has been that more people have learned about their electric bills and feel like they understand better where their electricity comes from, and that there are choices that they have about where their electricity comes from and the prices that they pay.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. We'll get into questions once all the panelists have spoken. And I'm sorry, did someone have Dr. Stanton, you have the PowerPoint presentation?
I do. I think that Mike Prokosh was going to go next, so
Okay.
if that's okay.
Great. And let's just keep it, just so we can get to everyone, if we could just keep it to 4 or 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mike.
So thanks to all the counselors who were able to make it today, and to those who couldn't make it but do support community choice energy. As Councillor O'Malley said, what this is really about is the storms that we've been seeing hitting the Caribbean, their increasing frequency and ferocity, and we all know that sooner or later, maybe sooner, one of them, maybe more than one, is going to hit Boston. The city's own projections show by 2070, within some of our lifetimes, half of East Boston underwater, 70% of the South End, and even for those of us who live in higher or more distant neighborhoods, that imagine the impact of shutting down the T, flooding the sewer system, overwhelming the electrical grid. Our economy would freeze. And think of how long it would take to climb out of that, and its impact on the high-tech, medical, and biotech industries that are now the core of our, a city that has that kind of an economic base cannot afford this kind of impact. So there are really two questions here. One is, are we going to leave the world better for our children or not? And the other is, what kind of economic gamble are we taking if we don't bring down carbon emissions as rapidly as we possibly can using every means at our disposal? And the quickest and most cost-effective way to do that is by adopting community choice energy, which also would give everyone in Boston access to renewable energy, whether they rent or own, whether they can put a solar panel on their roof or not, at no extra cost. The measure that we're proposing is extremely conservative. What we're saying is we want to buy as much renewable energy as we can without increasing ratepayers' costs, without increasing anybody's electric bill. So we're not picking a figure and saying this is the target that we have to hit. We're saying let's see what the market has to offer and get the best deal that we can, which across the region has been about 5% additional renewable energy spread across a very large rate base, which would be something like 15 wind turbines. So we'd be Brookline by a small margin there, or better if we can get a better deal on the rates that we get. Equally important, what this would do is increase the supply of renewable power in our region in two ways. One, by buying renewable energy certificates, we send a signal to solar and wind farm developers that they'll do well if they build more. But the other is Boston's leading role in climate change work and in technology generally. It's extremely important for the city to send a signal to other cities in Massachusetts, across the country, and energy markets and developers that a major city, a major player, is investing, is putting its money down and its commitment down for renewable energy. Right now, the city doesn't have a renewable energy program. What is it going to mean if we're hosting an international climate conference next year and we don't have a renewable energy program? Cities across Massachusetts have already adopted this measure, so we can't say that we're leading. But what they have done, and thank you to Brookline and the others, is shown that it is risk-free, that it's cost-effective, and that it's extremely popular with residents. A couple of weeks ago, Mayor Walsh was on public radio, and he was asked, why are we building new pipelines in the city if we're trying to get off renewable energy? And his response was, you can't stop development and the renewable energy supply isn't there. This is a way to start down the path where we don't have to choose between jobs and the environment.
Well said. Thank you, Mike. Just want to acknowledge we've been joined by District 7 Councillor Tito Jackson. Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Cleveland?
Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. I will be to speak. I'll be very brief. I feel like I've already given this statement before, and my fellow panelists have touched on many of the points that I wanted to convey to you all. Just to reiterate, my name is Kalila Barnett. I'm here representing the Green Justice Coalition, which is a campaign of Community Labor United that seeks to put frontline communities and workers at the center of the clean energy transition. Our coalition is made up of community-based organizations that are grounded in Boston's working class communities of color, environmental organizations, and labor unions. We first came together in 2007 to address the expansion of energy efficiency programs across the state of Massachusetts. Here today in support of the authorization that would direct city staff to put forward the appropriate resources to explore a CCE program for Boston. Thankfully, I don't feel it necessary to explain the urgency of the climate crisis to any of you all here today. I know that we all understand that to do nothing is to be complicit in the destruction of our communities and our economy. The good news is that today the council is being presented with an opportunity to take action that would not only help to secure a clean energy future for Boston residents, but would do so in a way that provides access to renewable energy for those who have been left out in the past. This is a policy that augments and complements work that the city is already doing, especially around its energy efficiency programs like Renew Boston, an effort that the Green Justice Coalition has supported from the very beginning. One of our principles states that we are working to achieve sustainability and resilience, community access to green renewable energy, green products and services that promote healthier lives and lower the cost of living, especially on energy bills. That work is essential. Community choice energy is not only a policy, it is an action that can bring renewable energy to working class communities of Boston and to all of the people of Boston. So again, we just urge you to support this measure when it comes before a vote at the council.
Thank you, Kalila.
So thank you, Council President Wu and Councillor O'Malley, for inviting me to speak today. My name is Liz Stanton, and I'm the Director and Senior Economist at the Applied Economics Clinic. I'm a PhD economist, and I've been analyzing and writing about energy, the environment, and community equity for the last 17 years. Yesterday, our clinic released a report and policy brief that evaluated the proposal before the council to adopt Community Choice Energy, or CCE. I'm going to walk through some of our key findings, and there are a few slides up here, and I think there's a handout for the councilors to be able to see the slides a little bit better. We focused our analysis, can we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. We focused our analysis on towns that are within Eversource's territory that have adopted a policy similar to that being considered for Boston. All of the towns and cities shown here procure 5% additional Massachusetts Class 1 renewables for their default electric service. As you can see, almost all of these towns are saving money with the program, except for Winchester. We think that it's likely that due to the city's size, that Boston will be able to fetch a competitive price that's in line with or cheaper than what these other towns are getting. In order to see if Boston could save money, it would be important to talk to multiple aggregators and to get the most up-to-date information possible. Once the city received actual bids, it could then decide whether or not to move on with the program based on real up-to-the-minute information. The CCE towns, can we go to the next slide, that we focused on had contracts between 18 and 30 months in length. The Eversource basic service rate changes every 6 months. So that means that CCE provides a stable, guaranteed rate for a much longer period. You know what you're going to pay for. It also doesn't cost much to get up and running. Boston Climate Action Network and Mass Energy surveyed 8 municipalities in Massachusetts. They talked about how little time and money was needed to run the program. And all of the cities and towns in the survey that said that it was worthwhile and that they would recommend it to other municipalities. The type of CCE that's being considered by Boston would lead to a cleaner energy mix for the city's residents and businesses. It would procure at least 5% additional renewable energy, more than what is required by the Commonwealth. And it would displace dirtier sources of energy that contribute to the city's current greenhouse gas footprint. One more slide. You can see here that renewables that currently make up 9% of New England's shared generation of electricity. It's just 9%. One more slide. The city aspires to be carbon neutral by 2050. But in order to get there, it's going to need a multi-pronged strategy to reduce emissions from heating and transportation, as well as electricity. And the electricity sector contributes 38% of Boston's greenhouse gas emissions. We estimate that CCC alone would reduce emissions by the amount equivalent to 6,400 cars taken off Boston's streets. CCE will increase local renewable energy, and it will give Boston's electric consumers more control over the impact of their energy use. But we know that's not enough. CCE is one of a suite of policies that could help the city achieve its climate goals. It should be viewed as complementary and not as in conflict with other policies meant to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Liz. And again, if we could just do the hands just to move everything along, appreciate it. Thank you all. I have some brief questions. I know my colleagues do as well. I did want to note that we, obviously, the committee invited both National Grid and Eversource to testify today. They both declined but sent letters which will be available in the public record. In Eversource particularly, we made sure that they had a literal and figurative seat at the table from the beginning, and will once we pass this. Additionally, there is a letter from Councillor McCarthy who writes, "I'm writing to apologize for not being able to attend today's Environment and Sustainability hearing. I'll be in Washington with some of my colleagues. I want to state for the record that I believe we need to do all we can to mitigate the effects of climate change. However, I have some concerns regarding cost, education, notifications. I look forward to reviewing the tape, hearing what recommendations come from this hearing regarding implementation." Well, I'm sure that when he reviews the tape, his fears will be assuaged as we get into some of the details. So this is just to open up. Anyone can sort of jump in. But sort of from a process point of view, and maybe this is better for you, Maria, the Brookline town meeting passed an authorization and then sent it to the selectmen or the town manager to implement?
So actually, once that was passed, it went to staff, and because
I see.
I have a climate action committee that is appointed by the selectmen, and we
Okay.
actually work together to develop the plan.
Your position wasn't brought, I'm sorry to
Yep,
cut you off,
no
but, so
problem.
your position wasn't brought on as a result, you were working there on
Yes, yes,
sustainability?
definitely.
Did you have to hire any staff to,
So I should just point out and say that I don't do climate action full-time.
Okay.
The way it works, I'm actually a land use planner half-time and climate action half-time.
Okay.
We are working to have a full-time planner. We did work with Good Energy, so it's impossible to do this without
Sure.
an experienced energy broker, but we did not bring on
didn't bring
extra
any
staff,
staff?
no.
And are you aware that, of the other cities and towns, or anyone needing to bring more staff on to implement this?
Not that I'm aware of. The others were mostly like towns,
Yeah.
much like Brookline.
So, and to work with Good Energy, did you guys put out a RFP and people?
So we worked with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Who've
They
been
had a
terrific in
procurement
this process
process, and
as
they
well.
had selected Good Energy, and we signed on with that and have been really pleased with Good Energy. Then working with Good Energy, we put together
Yep.
our aggregation plan. That does have to go through the Department of Public Utilities
right.
for approval, and then the bidding process commences.
So that's a fair point. So just so folks know, we originally did a hearing order for this and had a working session as a result back in April. This is an order from the council president and myself, which we will vote on. It will then authorize the mayor and Chief Blackman, who we'll get to in a moment, to sort of begin the process. And there is a very lengthy public process in place. I would venture a guess that given the fact that there are 670,000 people living in this city, this would be there'd be a lot of interest in a utility really giving the best possible deal, because it's a great, huge pool of consumers. And we have strength in numbers in more ways than one. Okay, and then I guess one of the critics, among the criticism I have heard, is that this is unstable and could cost the ratepayer more money. Mike, do you want to take a stab at, or Kalila or Liz or whomever, on safeguards that we can put in place so that doesn't happen?
When the city initiates a program, starts putting it into effect, it's targeted at a rate equal to or lower than Eversource's. So when the program starts, it would not cost the ratepayer more. The one thing that we can't control or predict is what's going to happen to Eversource's rates in the future. It could be that they kind of hit the jackpot, find a very cheap source of energy, or get a good bid from a generator, and their prices fall below the rate that City of Boston ratepayers are paying under CCE. This happened in Melrose, which up to that point had been saving its residents about $10 a year on average, and they paused their program. They said, we don't want our residents to pay more. Let's put this on hold and go back to the market later, and when we can get back in and save our residents some money or break even, we'll get back. That's one of the options that the city could adopt to make sure that residents don't pay more.
So I would argue that Melrose is a great example of how well this program works. It enabled a higher, what did they increase their renewable portfolio to? Was it by 5% as well, or was
Yeah,
it
about
greater?
that.
Okay, so probably 50% of what they had on top, they increased it by 5%, which is essentially what we would do. They saved ratepayers money, not a lot, but $10, you know, and they increased. And then when the scales shifted, they were able to pause the program so that residents wouldn't be penalized or would be able to take advantage of a much more favorable rate, while at the same time not abandon the program but wait for the circumstances to correct themselves, so to speak.
Exactly. It's flexible.
Great.
And on the
Thank
point
you.
of stability, it's also important to remember that while utility default service rates are moving every 6 months, that typically the contracts that we looked at in Massachusetts last for a lot longer than that. And so you know what your price is going to be, and the contracts that we saw were between 18 and 30 months.
18 and 30 months as opposed to the 6 months.
That's correct.
So this would be akin to anyone who, hopefully fewer are doing it, but people that were buying, oil for fuel can either lock in at a rate and pay that, or do a monthly thing and sort of
Yes, very similar.
be at the whim of the fluctuating market. Okay, that's very helpful. I do want to get to questions from my colleagues. Council President Wu?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just following up on the safeguards piece a little bit, in addition to an entire municipality being able to pause an aggregation, can you talk a little bit, maybe Maria, about individual opt-out and how that's worked in Brookline, what your experience has been?
Absolutely. So the state actually mandates that the program, when they're launched, there's a 30-day opt-out. However, we wanted the most flexible program possible, and people can opt out at any time. We also wanted to give people an opportunity to come back into the program and take advantage of competitive rates. So if they left and wanted to come back in within the 30-month period duration that we have, we would still honor those competitive rates. And that's just to give them an opportunity to really get a feel for how this meets their needs as a household.
And what does someone in Brookline have to do to opt out? Is it?
So to opt out, during the 30-day opt-out period, you do have to contact, or you actually have a form that you would just sign and return to the electricity supplier.
Okay.
Thereafter, you would just call the electricity supplier.
And then could you talk a little bit about process? So after an authorization vote, which happens from the legislative body, what type of community process is required by state law for, to give additional input into the procurement and setting of the plan?
That's actually an important question because DP, the Department of Public Utilities, takes consumer protections very seriously. They rigorously vet this. The plans, they do want to ensure that there are a variety of outreach mechanisms in place. So we adopted everything that we possibly could. We had small forms, we had large forms hosted by the selectmen, we had notices on our website, we had outreach groups going into neighborhoods, and we had brochures, things in print. We also targeted a wide variety of constituencies to make sure that we had tailored outreach to those groups.
And then switching over maybe to Professor Stanton, in terms of your research with other cities and towns, you mentioned that the ones surveyed said they would recommend it to other municipalities. Can you talk a little bit about any other feedback they had or recommendations?
I didn't do the survey myself, but I looked at the responses from it. They were overwhelmingly favorable, with the administrators of those programs having had a good and easy time with administering it, being happy with their aggregators and the products that they'd chosen, and getting good feedback from residents of the town and very high adoption rates.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of when a town would, or city or town would have to sort of press the go button to lock down the rates, and as rates are changed, energy prices are changing winter to summer, what does that look like, and how are there ways to kind of make sure we're getting the best rates? Does that all happen through the energy broker, or are there other things we should be aware of?
Yep, we actually relied a lot on our energy broker and also renewable energy expert, Sustainable Energy Advantage, which focused on the renewable energy market, and they provided an enormous education and resources regarding market cycles, what was happening in the market, things that would influence prices, so that we felt very confident we were making an informed decision at bid time, when to go out to bid and what bids to accept.
And my last question, I had just been chatting briefly, so I know with Chief Blackman we'll get more into this, but he had mentioned that we should take a look at the authorization orders language because there might be some changes to RPS, or the usefulness of the term renewable portfolio standards in the state law, given the recent Global Warming Solutions Act. As we're measuring this 5% relative to the baseline, we had been going by RPS for cities and towns that are doing it now. If the standard has changed, can you talk about how what you would recommend in terms of how they set that 5% standard?
For the time being, the standard remains the same. There are bills before the legislature to change it, and there have been in the past, so it's hard to say what's going to happen next with that. There is some flux going on. There is well-deserved concern with people around the state if our state's current policies are sufficient to reach the emissions reduction goals that we have in our GWSA, our Global Warming Solutions Act. And so new actions are being taken to make sure those two things meet up. At the moment, I don't think there's any change that would make sense or is warranted, but it's something to watch as we go forward.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Wu. Councillor Zachem?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question. I asked it at the first hearing is what's the objection to this? It can save money, can be greener. Anyone? No? All right. I want to thank you. I don't think my...
Something tells me the next panel may answer that question
Yeah,
a little
well,
bit better for you.
unfortunately, I do have an obligation in the district, so I'm not going to be able to stay for the rest of this hearing, but just want to thank everyone, though, for your advocacy on this. I'm looking forward to voting, obviously, in the affirmative if my comments were not clear enough, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Zachem, for your leadership on this. Let's do this, guys. Come on. Councillor LaMattina?
Thank you. Quick question, Council Brookline. So how many residents are there?
So we have a population of about 50,000, so we're smaller than Boston. The eligible account holders, we have about 22,000 eligible account holders. We have about 20,000 participating in the program, so that's about a 93% participation rate, and the majority of those participants are in our default product, which is the 25% product.
Thank you. That's impressive. And was there like a big campaign in the town?
Yes,
Okay.
we did spend a lot of time reaching out to constituents as much one-on-one as possible. We did a lot of outreach in neighborhood groups. That is key. It's important to really help people understand. No one really pays attention to their electric bill. And just understanding, energy markets alone can be a little complicated when you're adding that renewable energy layer. It adds a little more complication, but it's really amazing how quickly the cloud is dispelled and people are just like, I never knew this. I'm so glad to understand, have this information. So the response to that was really positive.
And I would just add that if you look around the room, you'll see that there's a kind of small grassroots army ready to do that outreach if this is adopted.
Yeah, because some of the concerns that we have is an increase in bills. I have no problem paying more money because I think it's a good thing. But I do have some seniors that are concerned about the impact we'll have on their bills. So can you talk a little about that? And
2 points. One is that the towns that we looked at, except for one, they're all getting a better rate, not a worse rate. The other thing is that in Massachusetts, all of the towns have structured these programs so that anyone can opt out. You don't have to be in the program if you don't want to. You can go back to Eversource's rate. It's your option.
so if there's a let me see, in Brookline, you have, who you using? You're using Brookline Green Electricity? Is that the company you're using?
No, so Dynegy is our electric
Dynegy,
supplier.
okay.
We call Brookline Green is the name of the program.
All right, Dynegy. So if there's a problem with electricity in my neighborhood,
Yep.
and 4 people in my blog has Eversource, and 6 people have Dynegy, who takes care of the problem?
So keep in mind that the quality of your electric service does not change because Eversource delivers the electricity. So you have any problems with billing, outages, you're going to call Eversource. So it's really seamless.
Okay. And then you mentioned something about tax deductions.
Right.
Tell
Now,
me a little about that.
so Dynegy purchases the renewable energy from a local nonprofit. They're actually in JP. Mass Energy, they've been around since 1982, providing more affordable or renewable energy options that are affordable. Because they're a nonprofit, the additional renewable energy that consumers purchase is available for a tax deduction, federal tax deduction.
Are you aware any towns or cities that don't want to do this, and the reason why? they don't want to do it?
You know, I think it's really, I haven't really talked to any communities that have rejected it outright. What people, once they start thinking about it, they learn a lot. And so it's just really a matter of tailoring the program to mitigate the risks and to meet consumer needs.
Thank you. Sounds like a good program.
Thank you, Councillor Lamartina. Councillor Anissa Sabi-George.
Thank you. Thank you again, Chair. I have a question about the benefits it may provide or the access that small businesses might have to purchasing.
Absolutely. So if you look at Eversource's structure, there are different rates for small businesses. They actually pay a little bit more than residential. And the rates that we provide one rate, no matter if you're a small business, large commercial, or residential. And so that's also attractive to small businesses.
Thank you. And then can you just talk, I don't know who would be the most appropriate to just talk about what changes or how the seasonal changes and the weather changes affect the rates and the product or the sources, you know, when we talk about the hot summers and the cold winters.
From the point of view of the town, it doesn't have an effect on your rates. So those changes, which are real and do affect how much renewable energy can be produced, that it is baked in, but it's not making your rate fluctuate. So it's considered when the steady 18 to 30 month rate is built. And it's considered in the Eversource rate too, but at a lower level. So.
Okay, good. Thank you. I mean, I continue to be fascinated and certainly supportive of it, but continue to learn more, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Asabi-George. Councillor Ayanna Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of my questions have been asked and answered, thanks to my thoughtful colleagues here. I had a lot of questions around sort of education and outreach and staffing levels and implementation. The one thing I did think I missed in my copious note-taking here, and I saw the slide, but I just wanted, could you just tell me how many municipalities in Massachusetts, what is the number, are currently participating? Sorry.
So there are 127 municipalities that are participating in some form of community choice. Not all of them have as part of their default extra renewables. So, and we tried to make a count of that and found that a number of the town's websites were out of date, and it was trickier to do than we thought. We counted up about 35 towns that we were sure had in their default service extra renewables, whether it's 5% or more than 5%. Okay. And then we counted up an additional 15 that made it a choice. So the default didn't have that, but you could opt up to do more. There are also, of those first 35 or so, a number of those towns give you an opt-up. So in your default, there's an additional 5% or 25%. But in those towns, they also give you a choice. You can opt out. That's always a choice. But you could also opt up. I live in Arlington, and we have this program now. And one of the choices is to opt up to 100% renewable if you want to.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, Councillor, just so I neglected to mention that. This has that opt up to 100%. That's what we would like to do as well. So opt out if someone doesn't participate. 5% increase, which will keep the cost at or below currently, and then the opportunity to opt up to 100%, which would likely cost more, but make it voluntary. Thank you.
Important point. Thank you for making it. And then, again, just this isn't a one-off. It really is not or and we're looking for every tool available to us. And what I like about community choice is the equality, the equity aspect of that, which I think is very important. And so to Khalila's point, as you were quoted earlier, saying that not everybody has the capacity to put solar panels on their roof. That is true. But it is also why, and it's very timely that this hearing is taking place at the same time that a solar equity bill is being debated. I will be introducing a resolution to this body on that measure. But again, it isn't an or, it is an and. So I hope you will also be supportive of those efforts. That is a bill sponsored by Senator Sonia Chang Diaz and State Representative Russell Holmes, because it is important that we are being intentional about being inclusive about combating climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Presley. Councillor Tito Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually want to quote someone who knows a little bit about energy, who studied not too far from here, a guy named Albert Einstein. And he said the world is a dangerous place to live, not because of people who are evil, but because of the people who don't do anything about it. We have an opportunity, and that's a pretty broad statement and applies to a lot that's going on right now. But in the face of Sandy, in the face of Irma, in the face of Maria, I literally just got off the phone with one of my friends who's headed to the airport to pick up one of our friends who lives in Puerto Rico. And he's coming to live here. And he's a lawyer. His dad's a doctor. But he's coming to live here, and he literally only has what he has on his back as he comes in. And I want to say prayers up for our brothers and sisters in and around Puerto Rico and all of the islands that have been affected. This is absolutely the right thing to do. It is way past the right time to do it. And I categorically support community choice energy in the city of Boston. And I don't know who would want to go in another direction that does not have a financial upside to going in that other direction. And when we look at cost or current costs, as we just heard, most of the places this is actually cheaper other than one place. So I had an opportunity to do a little research while I was up here. And so we should think about, can Boston handle this? Is Boston big enough, or are we equipped enough to handle this proposal? So I looked at some of the cities, towns, and municipalities in the state of Massachusetts that are doing this. And I wanted to share some information with you, a little bit about some of the large cities and towns that are doing community choice energy. Aquina has 311 people in it. Chilmark has 866. Wendell has 848. The bustling town of Orange has 7,839. Millville has 3,190. And Tyringham has 327 people. If we can't get it done in the city of Boston, where can we do it in the state of Massachusetts? We have 650,000 people and over 17,000 municipal employees. The city of Boston should be charging fast and hard towards where my colleagues have brought us. And by the way, while we're headed there, we should actually put a plastic bag ban on this one too and ensure that we do the right thing. So I guess my questions, most of them are answered. Is there any foreseeable or that's out there that these cities and towns, many of them smaller than some of our city blocks in terms of population, are able to administer in those cities and towns? And is it me, or is it the fact that this change does not get administered mostly at the local level and is actually administered by Eversource that makes this one of the administrative eases that makes us able to move forward? How easy is this relative to administration?
Sure. So just keep in mind that because there are 650,000 people, there might be questions, and I think it's important just to have available staff that's already on staff, just educated about the program to speak to it. Most people's questions are really, it's the same questions that they ask. So it's just really being able to provide that level of customer service to extend the education. Certainly during the opt-out period, there is an intense bit of outreach and responding to questions, and thereafter it really peters out a bit, and you do have the cooperation of your energy broker to administer the program. But keep in mind that every municipality is different. You know your constituents, you understand their needs and what the kinds of questions they might have. I really recommend just educating staff, the more, the better, so that they can respond rather than thinking right away that you have to add more staff.
Yeah. And the increase, the one town that had a higher price or cost, can you break that down for either what it means per year or what it means per month? What dollar difference? Do you have any?
They're very small. I don't have that numbered for you, but you can see that the difference is very small. It might be 1% on people's bills. It's a very small amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
So something like a parking ticket, which many people in the city of Boston receive?
A parking ticket would be a lot worse, yeah.
Okay, okay. So I guess, I want to commend both Councillor Wu, but also my good friend Councillor O'Malley for his passion on energy and environment, and a willingness to ensure that we leave it better than we found it. We know that we are a coastal city. I don't know if anyone's seen, there's some water down the way. And we know that we possibly have up to 32 additional inches coming towards us in the next 30 years. And if we as a city of Boston don't step forward and have leaders who have resolve, backbone, and the foresight to do something right now, then when can we do it? I believe that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. We learned a whole lot from what is going on in global warming right now. And as a city of Boston, we're not leading on this, by the way. There's 127 other folks. Maybe we can beat out, and we're not going to be number 350 out of 351. We have great leaders, visionary leaders in this area, and I absolutely categorically back what you're doing. I have, and I know if I don't, my mother's out front will be on the side behind me and on the other side. But when it comes down to this is absolutely the right thing to do. It's the right time to do it. We should move forward with no delay when it comes to CCE in the city of Boston. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Jackson. Very well said. Thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues before we get to our next panel? Seeing and hearing none, thank you all for your incredible leadership and great work. We really appreciate it. We hope you can stick around because there may be some questions, so if you can, just find a seat. Thank you. I'd like to invite Austin Blackman, the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, to please join us. Also, as Austin comes up, I wanted to acknowledge Jessica Mars from my office, who helped put this together, and our incredible central staff who's worked so hard. You can clap for them. Absolutely. And Austin, anyone else, or you?
Just me.
Solo. Okay, terrific. Well, all right. All right, so thank you. And again, we just ask any conversations, if you wouldn't mind just staying outside, and we will get to public testimony after Chief Blackman. Chief, I have this grand design that at next year's International Climate Conference, we can welcome people to Boston, where we've passed community choice aggregation, where we've cut down our use of plastic bags, where we have net zero carbon building, where we've got better preparedness than any other coastal city, and fixed gas leaks. That's right, and thank you, mothers out front, for that. So how do we get there? What do we need to do? What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? How can we get this done?
Well, before I get into that, Councillor, I just want to thank you for hosting this hearing. I want to thank all the other councillors for joining us here as well today. And I share your passion and your vision for the city of Boston, as does Mayor Walsh. It's why we've been leaders on the international stage. It's why we're hosting the Climate Summit next year. And it's why we've done such world-class work on the planning side to make sure that we keep Boston the economic thriving hub that it is today and continue to do so in the future. We've got bold goals, as you are well aware, in terms of our reductions for greenhouse gas emissions, 25% by 2020, and being completely carbon neutral by 2050. Community choice aggregation is certainly a very, very powerful tool. It could definitely help us attain our 2020 goal. With the hearing order that's on the table, it could give us about 0.5% in terms of a reduction towards that goal. So we are here primarily to listen and answer any questions that you may have today. We remain very open to the possibility of moving forward with an aggregation. We do have some concerns. There are some changes that have occurred at the state, which, Councillor, you asked about previously in the Global Warming Solutions Act, and I think that we're going to be asking for a working session to work through some of those details and have some continuing conversations, as our legal department has some concerns around the order as it exists. So we hope that we can move forward quickly with a working session following the hearing today to discuss that in more detail. We're also here to listen because we believe although that this could be a very excellent way for the City of Boston to move forward, we do have concerns around the cost of implementation, as well as the cost differential in terms of the prices that we have seen and solicited from some of the vendors that have worked on similar aggregations throughout the state. This is a particular concern for some of our low-income residents who typically live in neighborhoods that have higher than average electricity use. So not only would they be paying a higher rate, but then they also use more electricity, so their overall cost could be higher. Some of those neighborhoods include Roxbury, Mattapan, and Dorchester. Also, as was mentioned, I think Councillor Jackson pointed out that the City of Boston is much larger than many of our neighbors who have gone forward with a community choice aggregation. If I worked in one of those smaller communities, I would go door to door myself and do the education for the 300, 600, 1,000 residents. We've got over 600,000 residents here in the City of Boston, over 200,000 electric accounts. So the type of engagement that we would have to do would require a substantial amount of resources, and that would come certainly with some cost as well. That said, thank you again for having us here today. We're looking forward to answering any of your questions, hearing the feedback from the great partners that we have here in the City of Boston, whether that's Mothers Out Front, Clean Water Action, Sierra Club, but I'm sure I'm missing quite a few others. But thank you again.
Thank you, Austin. You mentioned some cost differential that you've seen from vendors you've solicited on this. Which vendors did you solicit? How many?
I'm sorry?
How many, first of all?
We have been working primarily with one vendor
Okay.
who would be interested in doing this. The rates that we've gotten back for an aggregation the size of the City of Boston with the load, the rates have come back at about 1% higher than what the current Eversource rate is. So on an annualized basis, as Councillor Jackson mentioned, that would certainly be less than a parking ticket. It would probably be about $11, maybe a little bit more on
Okay.
an annualized basis.
Have you ever had work done on your home?
I rent here in the City of Boston.
Okay, fair enough, as did I for many years. But, well, typically, you want to get at least 3 estimates before having anything done. So the fact that you've solicited one vendor and it's been a 1% increase, I think that augurs well. Have you ever been to Costco? Or BJ's, Sam's Club? You're familiar with the business model, though?
Very familiar,
Of course.
Councillor.
They can sell better prices in bulk if you buy more. So I think having a city with 200,000 separate electric accounts and 600,000 residents, this is a sought-after account that we would use this tool to really negotiate the best price for our ratepayers. No clapping for me either. I'm trying to think what else. So what are some of the other concerns? I just want to make sure I have it right, and I'm really trying not to be adversarial here, Austin, but your concern is the cost because you have one vendor who did an increased cost, correct?
It's in their best interest to provide the lowest cost and show it at a below rate. So, and this is something that we've gone out to the market now. I believe, Adam, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've done this now 3 or 4 times, and now 6 times, and each time it's come back at least a 1% increased cost, if not higher.
From the same vendor or from different vendors?
From the same vendor.
Okay, well, he's negotiating against himself.
It's the fee that the vendor would charge would not dramatically impact that rate. So the increased cost that's associated with that is really the renewable energy credits, not the broker's fee that would be associated with it. So we're happy to continue to investigate this. We're happy to go and ask multiple vendors for that. I think that the concern that we have is just that we've consistently gotten the feedback for an account as large as the city of Boston. Unfortunately, we have not been able to beat that rate. We've seen other cities in the Commonwealth that even have smaller accounts that have unwound their program because they haven't been able to beat the rate. As you pointed out with Melrose, that's something that just happened recently. I think another important thing to...
But I think that's proof positive that this works. And so let's assume when we pass this and it's kicked over to you and the administration to find out, if you cannot find a vendor, if you cannot find something that makes it work, then we don't do it. So the hesitance that I'm continuously getting from you, I can't wrap my head around it. I don't understand what is the harm in trying when we've seen this work so many other places elsewhere. And we know there are protections in place, like Melrose, that if things were to change dramatically, we could address that and head it off before the ratepayers would feel it. And in the meantime, we'll have done a lot for lowering our greenhouse gas emissions for the 2020 and the 2050 goals.
Well, in the meantime, what that would mean is that we will have done a full community process to inform our 650,000 residents, which would require a significant amount of staff time. And I know that there are very willing advocates and volunteers, many of whom are here in the room, who would be willing to help with that, and that's certainly support that I encourage and that I hope that we'll be able to have moving forward. But in terms of the resources that would require, before we even got to the point where we're getting approval from DOER, before we're getting approval from DPU, before we're getting those prices, there would be a significant amount of staff time that would go into that planning process. And I wish I had more staff and that they weren't already completely overworked, but that would take away from what we're able to do right now unless we were able to find additional resources in our budget to support this measure.
How many extra staff do you foresee having to hire to facilitate this?
So from the other cities that are of a similar size to Boston, what we have seen from them is that it's taken anywhere from 3 to 5 full-time staff all day, particularly when these procurements go out to implement something at the scale of the city of Boston. And other cities have been more ambitious in trying to include more things into their program and have had significantly higher staffing levels. So just to point out the cities that we have talked to, that we work with very closely through C40 and USDN, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. San Francisco had an aggregation, and they are continuing to move forward with one. There are about 800,000 residents in the city of Chicago is the other one that we've...
But again, this community process happens after we have the plan in place. If we get to a point where there's no plan in place, we don't have to do the community process. We had an election last week, and we had, I think, 24 or so polling places that had to have moved for a whole host of reasons, for overcrowding, for accessibility reasons. There was one in my district. The elections department, without hiring extra staff, canvassed the neighborhood, sent out letters, sent out emails, used social media. I find it a little disingenuous coming from you to suggest that we can't do this because it'll be too hard to get the word out and educate people. We do this all the time. That's what government should do, work with the populace and educate them. And we're doing this after we get to the... So I think we're putting the cart before the horse here. I'm saying let's say we pass this tomorrow, it kicks over to you, you begin the process of finding someone. You find a vendor, and I believe you will, that is going to give us a phenomenal rate that's going to save ratepayers money. Then we get to that process. If we don't, then we don't even get to that process. Was there any data that was shared with you or with advocates that showed that Boston could get up to 6% more for no increase in their rates? Right now we're looking for 5%. But are you familiar with that?
No, when we got prices, we looked at 5% above the renewable portfolio standard as well as the 100% renewable.
Okay. And the 5% is what showed the $11 increase from this one vendor. And what's the vendor's name?
Colonial Power.
Colonial Power. And who uses, what other cities and towns use Colonial Power?
3/4 of the aggregations in the state.
3/4. 3/4 of the aggregations in the state? All right. There may be some, we'll look into that. There may be some miscommunication here. All right, that's all I have for you right now. Austin, Council President Wu?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I know just as long as Matt and I have been at this, you've been at the table with us, so appreciate you continuing to engage with us. I just want to get into a little bit more detail. This, so you talk about a 1% increase from the estimates from Colonial Power. Is it 1% on the overall bill or 1% on the price of per kilowatt hour, or what's the 1% referred to?
1% on the overall bill.
Okay. And you said that that wasn't from Colonial Power. The estimate was the 1% total increase per month, which would be about $11 more per year on average for Boston with that estimate.
That's correct.
Okay. And then in terms of staffing and the 3 to 5 people, full-time employees estimate, so Adam already does procurement for us. Is that so? Or do we already have one FTE who thinks about energy procurement policy for Boston because we're already going out and doing our own procurements for city buildings? Or how would you start to think about piecing together that 3 to 5 team or people who would help with that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Yes, we do have someone who is responsible for administering a contract that we have for our own city buildings and the electricity that we use.
And do you imagine that that person's expertise and time would be able to help support a larger procurement too, or would you be looking for new staff, or how are you thinking about that?
I think that we would certainly leverage his expertise, our energy manager, but again, I think that the bigger component of this, when you look at what the city does on its own meters, there's no real community engagement that's required because it's all of our buildings, they're all within our control. But when we're talking about 200,000 accounts, that would require that one-on-one interaction in terms of explaining what these differences would be and the community engagement processes that we're very, very proud of here in the city of Boston, whether it's from Imagine Boston 2030, where we got over 18,000 pieces of feedback on our citywide master plan, or otherwise. That's not where our energy managers' skills would be put to best use. We would need people to be going door to door to talk about the changes that people would see on their electric bill.
So you're primarily concerned about capacity for community engagement and public outreach, like a sort of like the Greenovate kind of focus, outward focus. Okay. Just trying to understand what we would need to advocate for you to back you up with this. And then in terms of process, so as Councilor O'Malley was saying, after a successful vote from the council, would you envision then immediately kicking off the procurement to find an energy broker to work with the city to help find pricing, and then public meetings after that, or what are you thinking
That's not the process that's laid out by DOER. So the process that's laid out by DOER is to, through a municipal vote, give an authorization for a city to move forward. That would then start a consultation process with DOER in terms of what would be acceptable. Then immediately following that, we would kick off a municipal outreach plan, which would then, all that outreach and feedback from our citizens would then inform the municipal aggregation plan that we would then come up with after that point.
So when would you hire the broker after that, or? So,
and even after that we submit the plan back to DOER and to the Department of Public Utilities, and my apologies, DOER, Department of Energy Resources. After that plan was reviewed and approved by the Department of Public Utilities, at that point is when we would go out and file a RFP to hire a broker and to solicit bids for an energy services agreement. So the community process, as laid out by the Department of Energy Resources, would have the community process occur before we would solicit bids.
Okay. So Councilor O'Malley and I had met, we met with DPU, we met with some of these regulatory agencies, and they were very much aware of the fact that Boston taking this on would be different than any other municipality that has done it because of the sheer scale we're talking about. So I think it's sort of moot because I feel like what we're discussing here is just whether we're authorizing the administration to do the due diligence, and then we can have the conversation with the regulators after that about, you know, what order things happen. But I hear what you're saying and how that would be a concern if we're putting in all this energy getting people educated, and then we haven't even checked what the prices are to see if they'd be favorable. So I feel like regardless of what happens, I'm comfortable with pushing for the vote no matter what. But after that, would want to support you and the advocates in talking to the state regulators and saying, I think it makes sense for us to do the procurement, at least the initial procurement or RFP, to test out what prices are. You know, have the same conversation you had with Colonial Power, but open it up to anyone who would be interested, and then kind of assess back with the council and the advocates about whether and how we proceed from there. That's why in the order, there's also a provision asking for the creation of an oversight group or a stakeholder group. So I think that's something that we could talk about after the vote. And then finally, I just want to touch back on you talked about the Global Warming Solutions Act affecting RPS and how we're measuring 5%. So can you go into a little more detail?
Yeah, so the Global Warming Solutions Act is a law that the Baker administration is going to be held to in terms of meeting their greenhouse gas emission reductions. They used to have almost exactly the same goals as the city of Boston in terms of a 25% reduction by 2020 and an 80% reduction by 2050. The city of Boston is now carbon neutral by 2050 is our goal. But as part of that legislation, Governor Baker issued an executive order around this time last year asking the Department of Environmental Protection to come up with regulations to demonstrate how they were going to get there. And that's these 3D regulations, which were, the final regulations were actually promulgated about 9 days after this hearing order was filed. And so through my conversations with my counterparts over at EEA, the standard that is going to really drive the amount of renewables in the Massachusetts electric supply is no longer going to be the Renewable Portfolio Standard, but it's going to be something called the Clean Energy Standard. And this standard is going to start at 16% renewables in 2018, and it will increase by 2% each year through 2050. So that would get them to that 80% reduction by 2050. So the issue with using the language of a renewable portfolio standard in this order is that at that 2020 timeframe, basic service would basically be in line with what the minimum standards in the order are here. So we, based on the minimum standards in the order, by 2020, when we would likely be enacting this, if it's an 18 to 2-year process, then we would be no better off than basic service.
Great. So I think that makes a lot of sense to tweak the language to just replace Clean Energy Standard or replace Renewable Portfolio Standard with Clean Energy Standard, because the 5% that we're talking about, it's not that we're trying to get to the absolute of what would be 17% or 18%. I think we always want to be talking about pushing higher and beyond the state minimum standards, unless Eversource wants to tell us here today that they'll go above and beyond the state minimum. But I think given the responsibility to shareholders, that their economic structure requires them to be at that baseline, which is why we want to supplement that. So I think regardless, we're going to be talking about a 5% sort of differential above that, but I think it's a good point. Happy to swap out that language. Okay, so thank you so much. That's all I had, I guess, just to reinforce that language
If I can
change.
just add one thing
sure.
in terms of the language changes. I think that there's just a little bit of technicalities along with the 5% numbers, regardless of the standard that our legal team had wanted to make sure that we had a chance to discuss, and that's the reason why we're asking for the working session.
Okay, great. So we'll talk about those technical challenges offline. And then, again, just do want to reiterate with you that this is separate from the vote, but we will, I mean, I know I will, and I think I speak for my colleagues, that we'll back you up with DOER, DPU in talking about the order of community process and finding out the pricing to make sure we're not, wasting everyone in Boston's time, but we do it in the right order that makes sense for Boston. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anissa Asabi George.
Thank you. Chief, could you talk a little bit about, so I had asked a question earlier about the impact on small businesses and their ability to participate in this. I think that's fantastic. Right now there are 5,000 small businesses or so that are participating in a power buying group now. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that would change with CCE?
Yeah, so if those businesses are already using a third-party supplier, then this would not affect them whatsoever. They would continue to be on that third-party supplier.
Can you tell me just a little bit about that program, because I'm not super familiar with it?
There are multiple ones, so without knowing exactly which one, I wouldn't want to tell you any details without knowing exactly which one it is. But it works from a conceptual point of view. It works basically the same way of what community choice aggregation would try and do, except it's on a voluntary basis. These businesses are coming together, and my guess is it's probably Boston Buying Power. It's one of the larger ones. And so through this consortium, these businesses bind together and they say, listen, we'd like to go out and do our own procurement. They figure out what that load would be. They hire a broker, and they go out and they procure this electricity through a third-party supplier, and then that goes directly on their Eversource bills. They can add more renewables, or they can go with the minimum as required by currently the clean energy standard, as will be enacted through these regulations.
So if 5,000 small businesses are participating in that, I mean, that to me indicates an interest. Has your department done any outreach to businesses to see what their general level of interest is in participating in something like this?
It's something that we have spent some time on. If you look at small businesses, but also particularly the large businesses in Boston, I think large commercial, I think it's somewhere on the order of 90% of businesses use third-party supply already. So while a large component of our greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Boston certainly do come from our electricity supply, since so much of that load is already on third-party supply, the opportunity for the impact of aggregation actually becomes less. So even if we went 100% renewable, that would give us about an 8.5% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions, although our electric supply is responsible for much more of it. It's just because the aggregation has a smaller scope in terms of what's available.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Asabi George. Councillor Ayanna Presley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief, for your testimony. I think I disabled my mic. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right. So, Chief, could you just elaborate on for what length of time would additional employees be added for CC outreach? Would it just be just so that we're, to the Council President's point in terms of what we advocate for to support the successful implementation of this? So would those increased staffing levels just be for the initial process or for the duration?
I can tell you what other cities have done. In Chicago, they had basically their entire sustainability office dedicated to this each time that they went out and did a new procurement. So to a certain extent, that would be impacted by how frequently we went back out to the market. Right now, Eversource goes out every 6 months, and I think that that's something that, if given enough resources, that would be something that I would prefer to do, so that then we would know exactly when we would be able to beat Eversource's pricing and when we wouldn't. I think that some others have mentioned, other cities have gone into these long-term contracts, and while that's certainly a strategy that's actually what got some of these other cities in trouble, where they were now locking their residents into a higher rate. Chicago had long-term contracts. They abandoned their aggregation because they basically started it just before prices for natural gas cratered. And so the reason why San Francisco is able to beat the prices right now is the kind of the opposite side of the coin right there. Their investor-owned utility had a long-term contract for natural gas, and they were able to beat that price because natural gas prices cratered. So long-term contracts can work both ways, but what Eversource does by going out to the market every 6 months is they make sure that as frequently as possible that they're getting the best price available. That's basically what the city of Boston does right now with our own electric supply. We go out to in what's called a day-ahead market, so we're getting prices on a daily basis. Obviously, that wouldn't be feasible for doing something like this at the scale of 600,000 residents, more than 200,000 accounts. But the frequency, by going out to the market, getting pricing every 6 months on the same schedule as Eversource, we would know exactly when it would make sense for us to remain in an aggregation or to revert our residents and businesses
again,
back to
bearing that in
basic
mind,
service.
in terms of staffing levels,
In terms of staffing levels, I would go with what Chicago had
Okay.
done, in that they had 5 full-time staff dedicated
okay, so,
to this.
okay, all right. And then additionally, are there some cities that have been able to solicit additional funds in order to support community engagement and outreach efforts? Have you ever heard of that? Cities that have worked with DPU around an operational adder that would supplement so that the burden is not fully on the city. Would that be something that we could pursue?
I'm not familiar with specifically that for that purpose. I know that there are some operational adders that cities like San Francisco have been able to incorporate into their aggregation, but they were able to do that and still beat the rate because they were in a position where their investor-owned utility got into that long-term contract that was out of the money. And so
Okay.
even despite that they were able to beat it, that's not a position that we're in.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to say, just as a comment, Chief, and you are not, the lone person to do this, but I just want to say that I personally struggle with and find it a little offensive when we couch our hesitancy in advancing environmental initiatives about it being burdensome to the most vulnerable. I'll tell you why, because in that, I feel that it's inferring something about low income and people of color. This happened with the plastic bag ban debate, when in fact, we have Save-A-Lot, which is a low income grocer, and the people in those communities have made a decision, and I don't want us to insult the intelligence of low income and community of color people, because I just want to say this, and I'm asking everyone to be responsible in this way, because the reality is that the communities that are the most vulnerable to toxic waste dumps and food deserts and environmental justice issues and sea level rise are low income and people of color. And so I don't want to make the assumption that they are not willing to sacrifice and to do everything possible to protect themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. Councilor Tito Jackson.
Thank you so much, Councilor Ayanna Presley. Amen. I frankly, and this is, Austin, I know this decision is made way above you. And so what I'm going to say is this. If we're not willing to do this, then we are simply in the pockets of doing business for big business and not the people of the city of Boston. So I'm baffled, because this administration had no problem creating a whole department for the Olympics. Right? This administration had no problem pulling together, moving everything in the seaport for IndyCar. This administration had no problem putting forward an up to $12 million helicopter pad in the city of Boston over the objections of the people in South Boston. This administration had no problem writing a $25 million check to one of the biggest polluters in the history of companies, General Electric, that still owes $650 million to Pittsfield and the Housatonic River. So I'm baffled here, because the worst part of government is when we use excuses, delay tactics, and foot dragging in order to not do the right thing. I don't understand how we host a climate conference and we're not doing all that we can do when it comes to climate change, the best things that we can do relative to that. I'm told now, and I need clarification, and if folks from the Sierra Club can come forward, I'm told that the new standard does not replace the portfolio standard. I want to get clarification on whether or not that is the case. But we live in a world and in a city that will be adversely affected now after 13 named storms. We're at M. We know it's coming. We've done nothing to increase building standards in the Seaport area, which we know is going to be underwater in those 30 years. We keep on talking about building in Whitted Circle, which will also have water issues in that time. And we are simply foot dragging after towns that have 300 people in them have moved forward, and as a city of Boston, and as smart as our whole city, and frankly as smart as you are, that we're not moving forward on something that in MBA school you understand, which is economies of scale. And so I don't understand why the administration would want to block the visionary leadership and simply doing the right thing. And by the way, we're not first in class. We're talking about being 128th in the state of Massachusetts. That's not leadership. So it baffles me, and in fact it angers me, that in a city with the cost of living that we have, the city who has no problem sending us tax bills that go up way more than $11, that we are not going to do the right thing for less than $1 a month in the present to ensure that the young people who used to be in this room fighting for their education, because this is the school committee chamber, that they used to be here, that we can't leave a city of Boston that's livable for them. So I guess I'm not even going to ask a question. I'm not, because we had enough money when folks came in front of us, and I had to throw out a subpoena for people to tell us how much the daggone Olympics was going to cost. We had a whole office. By the way, we had meetings across the city of Boston for a month-long party. Well, let's not be late. I'm sorry. We're already late to this party. Let's step up, let's stand up, and simply do the right thing by the people and the future of the city of Boston. And if people aren't willing to lead, then I believe that they should just get out of the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Do any of my colleagues have further questions for Chief Austin Blackman? Okay, well, thank you. Chief, any closing comments?
No closing comments. I'll leave the fact sheet from DEP on the new standard with the council so that you all can see it for yourselves.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. So we have quite a bit. I have 12 pages of public testimony. Again, not everyone is going to speak, but so quite a few are. So I'm going to call up individuals 3 at a time. And thank you, Chief. And I would just ask you all to please keep your comments to 2 minutes. I will stay here as long as it takes. But we're going to begin with Adam Sazama and Kevin Kayami. If they could, Adam and Kevin could just please join us. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. My name's Adam. I'm a junior in the Boston Public School System, and I'm here today to ask you to support community choice energy. A lot of scientists talk about the year 2100. In the climate science world, 2100 is named as the end-all year when the worst effects of climate change will be seen, with major increases to global temperature, sea level rise, drought, and so forth. My cousin Nathaniel is turning 4 this month. In the year 2100, he'll be 83 years old, which means there's an excellent chance that he'll still be alive. Our great-grandfather lived to be 102, and if we ever have children and grandchildren, they'll be here to witness the worst effects of a crisis that could have been solved decades earlier by basic, doable changes in the way we generate energy.
Just eating into Adam's time.
If we want to leave a healthy planet for future generations, we need to act now to turn things around. In Boston, this starts with switching to renewable energy as quickly as possible. On behalf of my generation and those who will follow, I ask you to give your full support to Community Choice Energy Plan. This planet is worth saving. It's the only one we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Well done. Where are you student at school?
Boston Latin School.
Fantastic. Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm also a Boston Latin School student, and I'm here supporting Community Choice Energy because if we want to remain a successful city and if we want to keep improving the lives of our residents, we have to reduce our carbon footprint. We've already seen the devastating effects of storms along the Gulf Coast, the Caribbean, even the East Coast. Recently we saw Superstorm Sandy, which wasn't that far from Boston. It left millions of Americans without power. It killed over 100 people in this country, and it cost billions of dollars in property damage. We have families and communities that still have not recovered from this storm, and we're already seeing many in places like Houston, Florida, Puerto Rico, that are going to be going through these same issues in the future. What happened there could easily happen in our city. Because of the warming oceans and changing weather patterns caused by climate change, it's becoming more evident every year that we'll be faced with storms like this. Boston's a really vulnerable city when it comes to storms like these. We have a lot of coastal communities and vital infrastructure that's really at risk from storms. And any one of these storms that, if it took a different path, would have hit Massachusetts and the city of Boston, it would have done a lot of damage to our infrastructure and our communities, and it would have especially hurt low-income families, which wouldn't have had the resources to come back after a storm like this. For Houston, Florida, Puerto Rico, New York, Barbuda, the question was never if a major storm will hit, but when. Many adults here, they're asking themselves what the effects of slight costs changes in energy are going to have on them. I go to a school that has students from virtually every neighborhood in Boston, and that's not what we're asking ourselves. We're asking ourselves what will happen to our homes and businesses when the next storm, which will probably be more powerful than anything we've seen, hits our city. We're wondering whether or not we'll have to relocate as a result of flooding. We're asking ourselves if our communities have the resources to recover from the devastation we've seen across the country. And we're looking at cities that will struggle for years to come and wondering if we'll be in the same situation. Now, there's like a real sense of pessimism in my generation that I don't really see in older generations. We don't hear our parents talk about it, but when we talk about our futures with each other, we're always worried about the issue of climate change because we see cities where opportunities are just gone because of these storms. And we know that that could very easily happen here.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you both. At a time, apology if I mispronounce your name. Again, if there are any side conversations, just please be respectful of our speakers in the audience. Just please take them outside. More seats are opening up, so you won't lose your seat. Andy Bean, Megan Hassett, and Bolaji Olabegi.
Good afternoon. My name is Andy Bean. I am a campaign coordinator with the Boston Climate Action Network. The Boston Climate Action Network, or BCAN, has spoken to dozens of community and civic organizations about community choice energy, and at this point communicated with literally thousands of people across the city. And as you saw with the 12 pages of testimony, it's pretty clear that climate change matters to the people of Boston. And taking action to fight climate change matters a heck of a lot. Just today, we have a hearing on a solar bill up at the State House on neonics, the bee-killing pesticides, and natural gas leaks summit with hundreds of people over in Cambridge. And yet, with all of those environmental things going on today, every single seat here was filled, and there were dozens of people sitting in the back and standing in the back to make their voices heard. We are counting on the Boston City Council and on Mayor Walsh and his administration to be climate leaders. Thank you so much. We're counting on you.
Megan?
Hi, my name is Megan Hassett. I'm the campaign organizer with Environment Massachusetts. We have been working around the state building visibility and demonstrating support for Massachusetts to commit to 100% clean renewable energy, so we're definitely in full support of Boston's community choice aggregation program. The effects of climate change, from more dirty air days and asthma to regular high tide flooding and big storms, are already ones we're seeing unfolding in areas around the country and here in Massachusetts. We have a responsibility to do everything we can as fast as we can and lead the way to get us to safe, healthy, clean, green energy future powered by wind and solar. And Boston's been a leader on climate action in the environment, including being #1 for energy efficiency, but we really need the city to lead now more than ever. The administration might disagree, but we're still not doing enough, and there is no time to rest on our laurels or get complacent. We cannot afford to look around and say that we're doing enough. As the capital of the Commonwealth and a global leader, bold climate leadership puts more energy on the grid that would be clean and is also a great step forward, and it allows for lower income Bostonians and renters who wouldn't have the opportunity to go renewable to do so. It's entirely possible. We've seen Apple, Google, and Facebook, Salem, Cambridge, and Framingham committing to 100% renewable. We're here in Boston, we've got plenty of brilliant economists and engineers, so to avoid taking this on out of fear or be difficult is definitely absurd. Community choice energy will help us meet existing commitments, from cutting carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 to the mayor's plan of a carbon neutral Boston by 2050. Renewable electricity is a huge chunk of getting us to 100% renewable energy across the board. We've already heard that Arlington, Somerville, they're already moving forward to CCA, and we should definitely do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Megan. Thank you. Is Bolaji Olabegi here? Olaji, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. And after you can join Bolaji, Casey Bird and Radahi Samtani. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Balaji Olagbegi, and I'm a student studying environmental analysis and policy at Boston University. I'm also on the Youth Advisory Board for Clean Water Action and a member of DivestBU. And so basically a campaign at school where we try and advocate and organize students to get our administration to stop investing in fossil fuels. And I'm just also super happy to see everyone here in support of this bill. I'm here today in the midst of studying in midterms because this bill is really important to me. And I think that not acting now would be detrimental to the advancement of our progressively green community and our health. When we allow community aggregation, stronger communities will become the foundation of our city. Neighbors will begin to care for neighbors again, and families will begin to exist beyond the walls of a home to include entire communities. We are not isolated and need to realize that when poorer communities suffer, we all suffer. When they're sick, the economy's sick, and when the fossil fuels they rely on are released into the atmosphere, they affect us all. The exuberant costs required to set up the initial infrastructure for solar and other renewable energy, unfairly limits many people from implementing carbon neutral alternatives that they otherwise would. Mayor Walsh said that we are committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And while we've made some progress in that direction, there's a lot more that could be done, and this is a really big step that could help that. We've seen this system is possible with several municipalities throughout throughout Massachusetts, like Newton and Arlington, and even on a wider scale in Ohio and California. And I believe that if Boston passes this bill in support of municipal aggregation, many other cities and states will follow. Local governments like Boston are imperative right now because in a time where national growth has been stunted by federal bipartisanship, this bill represents our commitment to the earth and to the people in it. And it'd be really great if we did it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking time out of your studies to be here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Riddhi Samtani. Good afternoon, council members. I'm really glad to be here and to see you guys on the panel, really supportive of this bill. And to everyone in the crowd, thank you so much. I am not only here as a concerned citizen, a resident of Boston, but I hail from an island in the Caribbean, as you may have heard, the island of St. Martin, which was devastatedly destroyed by Hurricane Irma. St. Martin is 37 square miles of paradise that was 95% destroyed. And, you know, those on the island who had been denial of climate change and the forces that are in action now have been awoken by this tragedy, and they've opened their eyes, and one of the things that they most regret is their inaction, and their inaction towards building resilient infrastructures and implementing institutional laws and legislation to protect the infrastructure. And so, as the news makes it more obvious every day, Boston urgently needs to meet its climate emissions reduction targets. In order to do that, we need to capture all the energy savings that we can, including smart bulk energy contracts. CCE has been used successfully in many other communities in Mass, as we heard, Brookline to be example, to both lower costs and climate emissions from fossil fuel consumptions, and many others are considering taking up. Even though the sheer scale for Boston is large, I think that Boston can be a leader in this, and I'm glad to see the support that we are drawing from it. I think we need the administration to be courageous in this time of urgent need and to do the right thing for us, the coming generations. We, the young people, stand to lose way more than your generation ever has, just because we are in our prime. And to a statement that was made earlier by Councillor Jackson, and to a statement that was made earlier by Councillor Jackson, we, the students and the youth, we're still here. We didn't leave. We fought for our education, and right now we're fighting for the resiliency of our planet. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do you still have family members in St. Martin?
Sorry?
Do you still have family members in St. Martin?
I do.
And are they all okay and accounted for?
I think that right now things are just very dire. It's been more stable.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a war zone. So we're a state of emergency, and the military is down from both the French and the Dutch sides. If you know, it's half French and half Dutch. So the military is on the ground. The government's kind of in kind of a mayhem, but hopefully this, Boston's my second home, and I'd hate to see the same trajectory of what a natural disaster can evoke to what I've made home here, because home has just, kind of like been destroyed.
Absolutely. Well,
So-
thank you for sharing that, and please let your family and neighbors and friends in St. Martin know that we're all thinking of them and pulling for them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Is Casey Bird here? No. Okay, Casey's not here. Oh, thank you very much. We'll make sure everyone gets one. Thank you very much, Megan. Kalish Castro? Stephanie Yesnin? And, I'm sorry, Stephanie did not want to testify, so Kalish, you are up, and then joining you will be Grady Mcgonagall, I believe. Grady is the first name, from Elders Climate Action. Grady, yep, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair O'Malley, Council President Wu. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Kalish Castro, and I am the Boston organizer for the Sierra Club in Massachusetts. I live in Jamaica Plain, and I'm here today as a resident of Boston, as a concerned citizen, and on behalf of the over 8,000 Sierra Club members in the city of Boston, some of whom are behind me here today. I am originally from Puerto Rico, and all of my family are presently there. As you know, just 2 weeks ago, Puerto Rico was hit by a devastating storm, and I was unable to communicate with my family for over a week. When I finally was able to communicate with them, I found out that my home had been destroyed and over 95% of the island's electrical grid was destroyed. People there, including my family, presently are without power and without water. Believe me when I tell you that that was one of the longest weeks of my life, and the day that I had to call the Red Cross to just make sure that my mom and my grandmother were in one of their facilities was a tough day as well. I sincerely hope that none of you here today have to go through an experience like that. I fear if we, by we I mean Boston, do not take steps, we could too suffer a devastating climate event like the ones in Puerto Rico and Texas and in Florida that will destroy our city, endanger its citizens, and cost billions of dollars to repair. Mayor Walsh has positioned Boston to be a climate leader and joined the C40 Climate Leadership Group, a group of 40 climate leader cities around the world. I believe that the best way for Boston to play a role as a climate leader is to enact proven policies such as community choice energy that will help Boston be a more environmentally conscious city. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalish. And Grady, before we get to you, just, Kalish, I had the great fortune of meeting with probably a month or so ago when you first joined Sierra Club. Radahi, I hadn't met before this, but I've certainly seen her at these events. So we didn't plan this, but let's just let this sink in for a minute. 2 of the first 5 people to testify who've been involved in this process from the beginning have family in 2 islands that have been devastated by Category 4 hurricanes in the last 2 weeks. It's amazing. And you're still, and it's amazing that your leadership and your strength, and you're still here to fight this. But lest anyone think, you know, that tomorrow hasn't come. We are here. And the fact that we have got a president and EPA administrator who are climate change deniers, we must act, and we must act now. So thank you for sharing that. My point is, we didn't plan that. This wasn't done by design. This just happens. 2 of the first 5 people to testify have that connection. So thank you for sharing. And is your family? It sounds like everyone's all right now. It's just going to be a long
Yes,
road
sir. I
ahead.
got a call from my mom this week or today when I walked into the office.
Good. Well, we will, our hearts with them as well. And another aside, I was at the Margarita Muñiz Academy in Jamaica Plain today, where students are organizing. They're trying to adopt a school in San Juan. The school year is essentially shot down there, but just to see. And we are going to stand with our neighbors in Puerto Rico. So thank you. Mr. Mcgonagall, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Grady Mcgonagall, the founder, leader of the Massachusetts chapter of Elders Climate Action. We're a new group representing the not still in our prime, but primed to speak out on behalf of the recently born, fittingly symbolized in the lap of Councilwoman Wu. Next to whom I've had the pleasure of standing in protests against unneeded pipelines in West Roxbury. I'm delighted to learn just recently about this proposed order that you jointly co-authored. And I didn't know until last night that I was going to come. I didn't know until I arrived that I was going to testify. I don't have written testimony. I'm speaking off the top of my head, but from my heart. Which brings to mind something I wanted to mention just in response to what you said, Councilman O'Malley, about the panelists who have testified so far and their link to the disasters. I'm from Texas, so deep in the heart of Texas, and I had relatives and friends in Houston, all of whom happily are alive, but many of, you don't need to tell me what's happened there. I don't need to make a case for this order. I say legislation, I've been more focused on the Massachusetts legislature, but this, I think, focusing really locally in Boston, and although you may be only the 128th to sign on to this, symbolically, you're by far the most important. So I don't need to persuade you that this is a good thing to do, but I'd like to go on record on behalf of elders and for the generations yet to come, to whom you've done great service by proposing this order. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Grady. Well said. I'm glad to hear your family in Houston is doing well. Thank you so much. Carol Oldman. And Greg lives on Red Road Street, it looks like T-H-O, Toley? Toll, okay, so, thanks, sorry about that. So Carol and Greg, thank you. Hi, Carol, how are you?
Hi.
Okey-doke, sure, thanks.
So I had a couple of remarks. First of all, thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you for your leadership. I had a couple of remarks prepared, but I'm going to skip them because they would be repetitive. What I'd like to do actually is respond a little bit to a couple of the points that Austin brought up.
Folks, if you're having side conversation, if you could just take them in the outside, please, thank you.
So, I think the one thing that I had prepared that is worth saying is that Boston has to use every tool in the toolkit. If we're going to be a carbon neutral city, we can't just do energy efficiency. We need to do things like community choice energy as well. And as Austin pointed out, Boston actually has a broker that they get their electricity from, and they manage to get that cheaper than Eversource. So I think that's really interesting. I would also say that to my knowledge from all of the information that I've seen, so I'm the executive director of the Massachusetts Climate Action Network, as well as one of your constituents, and we work with cities and towns across Massachusetts to provide climate solutions. Community choice energy is one of the things that we've worked with several towns on, and it's a tool that we love. I have not seen Colonial do any green aggregation programs in any city or town across Massachusetts that I know of. And they do a lot of towns, many of them are very small towns, so a provider like Good Energy that works with Mass Energy Consumers Alliance does a lot more larger towns. I also want to, yeah.
I won't take this out of your time, but just so
Sure.
I have this. So Colonial Power, according to Austin, it's his understanding that they oversee 3/4 of all aggregates. That could be number of towns and
Yeah.
not necessarily those that employ a percentage in renewable sources.
Exactly.
It's closer to 52.
52%, all right, that's important too.
Yeah.
Half, not 3/4, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would also like to point out that in terms of outreach opportunities, there are a lot of, I live in Eggleston Square.
Yep.
And I get a lot of mail from the city of Boston, and every single one of those is an opportunity for outreach. So you can put it in people's tax bills, you can put it in people's water and sewer bills. There are many, many opportunities to let folks know about this program that do not cost additional staff time.
Right.
And also, I just want to point out that the Clean Energy Standard and the Renewable Portfolio Standard complement each other. They do not replace each other. They support each other, and the Clean Energy Standard is about clean energy, but the Renewable Portfolio Standard is actually cleaner, better energy. The Clean Energy Standard includes natural gas, and so some of the natural gas plants that could be built, and so the Renewable Portfolio Standard is really focused on actual renewables, so true clean energy that is within our region, which creates jobs here.
Good.
So.
Perfect, thank you very much, appreciate that. Greg, you're up.
Okay, my name is Greg Thole. I'm a Dorchester resident and a member of BCAN. I interviewed the energy managers for Cambridge and Salem as part of the presentation that you saw. And I also want to respond to a point made by Chief Blackman. He expressed concern about the cost of outreach to residents and the amount of staff time. The energy managers in Cambridge and Salem were both very positive about their experiences setting up an aggregation. They said that the consultant that they hired took care of all the mailings, all the outreach, the flyers, the billboards, and they have customer service numbers where people call to. And that all that comes out of the percentage that the consultant takes as part of the CCA. If there's additional cost and there's actually staff time that Boston has to use, whereas these cities didn't have to, if there is additional staff time that's required, the law has something called an operational adder, where you can apply that towards any additional cost incurred by the city or for other purposes, so that you can cover these and help ease the transition, which is a one-time thing. And then once it's done, now you have the flexibility to be able to use the tool in order to achieve it whenever you have the cost differential. It is a very flexible tool and the most effective way to quickly reduce emissions for the city of Boston. Thank you.
Great, thank you both very much, appreciate it. Michelle Nolan, And James or Michelle, John and Michelle, if you could join us up here, please. There he is.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Michelle Nolan, global citizen. You can't put a price on clean air and water, period. And we demand more than from our elected officials than just being donor puppets. Big oil controls everything. I don't see any footwork being done when the utility bills want to raise their bills on us. You know, we're just a captive audience. It's ridiculous, and it's outrageous that the facts are in, the people have spoken, 3 and 4 persons want clean energy. 70% of Trump voters want this as well. So let's be real. The only reason we don't have it is because of big money. And they're the ones who have a chokehold on our planet. I mean, they're dumping pollutants in our waters. And they're deregulating by the day. And nothing is being done. It's time to stop. People have to take back the power and stop allowing these corporate criminals to dictate the rules. They're writing the laws, and they're paying these puppet politicians to implement them. Enough is enough. Done. Thank you.
Thank you. Dom?
I feel you, sister. My name is James Michelle. I am from Hyde Park. I'm here today, a proud co-founder of the Boston Clean Energy Coalition. Very happy to be with a lot of my friends in the grassroots activist community. I want to reinforce one thing that Andy Bean said, which is there's a big meeting over in Cambridge, Mothers Out Front, talking about gas leaks. There's another one up on Beacon Hill talking about community solar, bringing equity into the way in which we go about stopping the restrictions, the drag on solar. So it's great to have such a huge turnout here today. People recognize that this is really an important program. In a previous life, I was a public servant. I worked in the field of mental health and substance abuse treatment, and I administered a huge statewide contract on behalf of Medicaid. It applied to about 500,000 people, 500,000 covered lives. It was the mental health benefit. We hired a private firm to administer that benefit and really transform the way in which the system of care was delivered. I had a staff of 2, so there were 3 of us. That was for a revolutionary program. This is in the early 90s. I do not for a second believe, especially hearing from Carol, that we already have a contract with a energy purchasing broker, that this is a burden. I think it's real that community education is a big thing, but we live in an age of social media. I mean, you know, we can leverage the energy of existing staff and all the volunteers. I'm sorry, that's just another sort of new reason to drag, delay, hello. This is one step, part of a huge number of programs that we need to do, and let's get on it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Mary Russell is next, and then Kevin already got, and Adam we got. Is Olivia Marks still here? We've got Mary Russell. Hi, Mary.
Yes.
And no Olivia Marks. How about Linda Hirsch? Linda with us? Okay, Linda, if you could join us as well, please. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Mary Russell. I'm a Rosendale resident and a member of BCAN, and I'm here to read the letter of endorsement from the Clam Point Civic Association, Maggie LeBlanc, president, and this is the letter that she sent. As Boston faces increased
coastal flooding, storm water flooding, and extreme heat due to rising temperatures, we need a strong municipal response to the threat of climate change. We endorse community choice energy as an important step towards greener Boston. Community choice energy allows the City of Boston to choose its mix of electrical power. While Eversource will still deliver the electricity, we can get more local renewable energy like wind and solar while stabilizing electricity prices for Boston residents and small businesses. Other cities and towns in Massachusetts have already embraced the community choice energy, and it's time for Boston to join them. We have seen Boston create many innovative solutions to complex problems. Climate change is one of the most critical problems of our generation, and a problem of that magnitude needs solutions on all fronts. Community choice energy is the fastest single action Boston can take to meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals. We hope you will strongly support it. The Clam Point Civic Association appreciates the opportunity to participate in the community review process as provided by the City of Boston. The letter from Maggie LeBlanc. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda?
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Hirsch, and I'm a homeowner in West Roxbury. One thing that I would like to remind people about is that climate change is not something that is coming to Boston someday. Climate change is already affecting Boston. You know, as a relatively new retiree, I'm thinking about my time and what I'm doing with it, and I'm already afraid that I may end up with heat stroke in the hospital because I go outside on the wrong summer day. I'm already afraid that I might get caught in one of those flash rainstorms and then drive down the wrong street and get my car flooded out. Those, relatively speaking, are inconveniences. We're much more worried about the really devastating and neighborhood-destroying events that we could see eventually. But all I'm trying to say is that we may have less time than we think before things get a lot worse here. I sometimes compare climate change to a serious progressive disease. If the doctor were to tell me we may still be able to beat this, but you will need surgery and chemo, and you must stop smoking, I hope I would not get caught up in an internal debate over which one of those things I was willing to try. The truth is that we have to do everything we can as soon as we can. The city already has some active programs and great future plans to fight climate change, but we need community choice energy too. So I hope that you will pass the order, and I hope that the city will go to work enthusiastically to implement it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you both. Cam Wilson and Dick Clapp, Richard Clapp and Cam Wilson. Two of my favorite constituents, among my many favorite constituents here.
There it goes. Okay. Should I start?
Our favorite city council.
There you go, thank you.
Should I?
President.
Should I start?
You should, Cam.
This is quick. I just wanted to put in a quick word for the third world, where people are already drowning and dying from the heat, and a word for the human race, which is at risk because the ocean is slowing and it could slow to a stop, and we're already losing coral reefs. And so to me, this CCE in Boston is one more foot on the ground to stop the train from going off the cliff. And I think we should build a wall in the harbor. That's all.
And make climate change deniers pay for it, right?
Make Trump play for it.
My name's Dick Clapp, as you said, and I'm a Jamaica Plain resident, as you also said. I can't get over how cute this little baby is looking out here, smiling at us. In spite of that, I just wanted to say one small thing about Chief Blackman. He made a point about that the
community choice energy program of increasing renewables by 5% would make the city 0.5% closer to its greenhouse gas reduction goals, or maybe its carbon, but that's the wrong denominator. He's using the wrong denominator. That's a de minimis way of calculating it. And really what it is, it's 5% on top of 12%. That's a 40% increase of residential uses of greenhouse gas, of renewable energy, and that's what we need to focus on. That's why I admire your leadership in bringing us all forward, and I wish you the best of luck in getting it implemented, and we'll be with you all the way.
Right. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay. Moving right along, folks. Oh, nobody on that side. So I'm going to go through this list. A lot of no's. If anyone wants to testify that didn't sign up or wrote no, we'll get to you. Sarah Freeman, speaking of favorite constituents, and Mark Liu. So Sarah Freeman and Mark Liu are the next two. Oh.
I am speaking for Sarah.
Oh, fantastic. And is Mark Liu here from CPA? Oh, Mark's great. And then Edith from Mothers Out Front will be the last for the first thing. So Edith, you're on deck. Okay.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Monica Briggs. I'm a member of BCAN. And Sarah asked me if I would read this letter for her from the Arbor Way Coalition. And the letter is regarding CCE on behalf of the coalition. Thank you for your commitment to making the City of Boston a national leader on parks, environment, and green energy and climate change. The Arbor Way Coalition has been pleased to participate in a variety of Boston's park, pedestrian, and bike safety projects, such as Olmsted Park landscape restoration, path improvements at Franklin Park, Vision Zero, and the Rose Garden Party fundraiser for park arts. We are a collaboration of JP residents and other interested parties who work to preserve the Arborway as a green multi-use parkway connecting 3 emerald necklace parks designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. These parks are Jamaica Pond Park, Arnold Arboretum, and Franklin Park. Our goal is to improve access to these parks for all users. We are writing to encourage the city to take an important additional step toward a greener Boston by adopting community choice energy. By allowing the City of Boston to choose its mix of electric power, CCE would result in more local renewable energy like wind and solar, while stabilizing electricity prices. Delivery would not have to change. It would remain with Eversource, and the city could benefit from bulk purchasing to get a beneficial price. Residents could opt out, and so it's a low risk for the residents. As Boston faces increased threats from climate change, such as the flooding and extreme heat that we have seen around the country, we need to have short-term and long-range plans in place. CCE is the fastest single action that Boston can take to meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals. We hope Boston will join the growing list of Massachusetts municipalities who are adopting CCE. Thank you for thinking about this and other ways to keep the City of Boston in a leadership role. And then just for myself, I don't have a lot to say, but I am a preschool teacher. And so I see every day reasons to take action. And it's very powerful. And that baby is the most powerful testimony here that I could imagine. Thank you for bringing your child.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I totally agree. I was looking at Councillor President Wu's baby and saying that's the best reason to do something about this. My name is Mark Liu from the Chinese Progressive Association. We represent over 1,200 members in the greater Boston area. Again, thank you, Councillor O'Malley and Council President Wu, for bringing us to the council. We just want to come here and show our full support for community choice energy. As a city, we have to look at all possible methods to combat global warming. Speakers before us talked poignantly about how this has affected the Caribbean and the southern part of the United States. We're also seeing it in China. In my family's hometown in Toisan was hit by flooding and typhoons that destroy a lot of people's homes and lives. We saw it a few years ago when Hurricane Sandy hit New York, and we saw elderly stuck in Chinatown high-rises without any water or electricity. And from the Boston Climate Ready report, we see that Chinatown, South End, and other neighborhoods in Boston are up next. And we'll be underwater in the event of a major storm if we don't do anything. And we know that low-income communities like ours will be hit hardest by the climate disasters.
And climate choice energy, we must use all the full tools available for us to fight climate change. And as I think has been pointed out before, community choice energy gives all Bostonians access to more renewable energy, not just the few who can afford it. We all deserve access to energy that does not put our communities more at risk and endanger our health. And I think to Councillor Presley's point, there are many people in our community, we represent low-income, immigrant, working-class families that are supporting community choice energy. We have our youth in the back who, at our block party and different events, have talked to constituents and people in our community about this and have collected dozens of signatures in support of it, showing the broad support for it. And I think, as you know, many folks are also facing a housing crisis and getting pushed out of their communities. And so as long as utility rates bills don't go up, and it's from the research that was shown today, I think it could also maybe even bring costs down. We support community choice energy going forward. Finally, I just want to bring up that in our community, we have a drop-in service, and we've seen many of our community members be prey to a lot of aggressive salespeople who have been pushing other energy companies without people understanding what's going on. So people who don't speak English have gotten signed up for signing for energy companies, and they come into our office because their energy bills have gone way up, and we help them undo it. But we hope that community choice energy kind of eliminates that, and that we can get people signed up for more renewable energies without bringing the cost up, and that there's a robust outreach effort so that folks know about this in multiple languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you both for your testimony. Edith from Mothers Out Front is next, and then Don Tesorero from BCAN, or either Edith or Don here. Oh, Don is here. Is Edith here? Okay. So join after Don. Don will be next, followed by Ride, just already testified. She signed in twice. And then Isabel is our last public testimony after Don. Is Isabel here? Oh, so just take the seat, please, in front of you. Dawn, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much. Again, my name's Dawn, and I've been marching with those in West Roxbury trying to keep that pipeline out, and I thank you both for standing strong against that. Matt O'Malley, you have also helped me with my church. So not only am I a member of BCAN and a resident of Rosendale, but I'm also a member of St. John's Church in Jamaica Plain that's been around since 1880. Wonderful Roxbury pudding stone. It just sucks up the water and brings it in. So when we have bad storms, we see it inside and outside. Our group at that church, as well as within the Episcopal Diocese where I'm a volunteer, we just signed on and will be pressing a resolution in November for We Are Still in accordance with the Paris Agreement, and signing on with all of those governors and universities. We've also, with the Creation Care Task Force, actually with our 183 churches throughout the Boston area and Eastern Mass, have actually looked at divesting fossil fuels from our investments. And the little Church of St. John's is also put into an investment fund that's fossil fuel free. So we understand that we're doing this for our generation and future generations. Also, I'm a former Boston Park Ranger, and for 7 years I got to take about 3,000 children out to the Boston Harbor Islands. We finally got access to those Boston Harbor Islands, and if we keep going where we are, we will have a scuba park. And that scuba park, although fun, will really limit the socioeconomic kids who can't buy scuba gear to visit. It's already expensive to use a boat to get to an island. And teaching those kids the environmental education that's necessary for them to have environmental skills and the environmental language to understand climate change, they're ahead of all of us, and yet we need to support them. So thank you both for submitting this and pushing it forward. We do need Boston's clean energy now. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much. Isabel?
Hello, so my name is Izzy Isselbacher, and I'm a high school senior here in Boston, although I'm actually a resident of Newton. And although I don't live in Boston, I'm still testifying here today because the entire state of Massachusetts depends on the well-being of Boston. And so as I'm a high school student, I may not be familiar with terms like operational adder and portfolio, but I do know this much about CCE. Making this change is both the right thing to do and the wise thing to do. It matters not just in terms of Boston's global carbon footprint, but also in terms of like the example we set for the rest of the country and even the world. After all, Boston is a leader in many spheres: education, science and technology, and more. So now it is a time to be a leader moving towards sustainability as well. When we look back on the great tragedies of history, like slavery and the Holocaust and more, we always ask ourselves, where was the government? Where were the people? Why was society not united in combating these monumental issues? So when I'm a parent or a grandparent, I don't want future generations asking me why I didn't do more and why we all didn't do more. I want to be able to say that I, as an individual, and we as a city did everything in our power to solve the most pressing issue of our time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Izzy. Well done. So that was all I have for public testimony. Is there anyone else whose name I didn't read or didn't sign in or would like to testify? Going once, going twice. Did I see a hand? No? Okay. All right. Well, this is good, guys. I think we're going to get out of here by 5, which is good. It's about almost quarter of. I would just like to say in closing that thank you. Thank all of you. I spend most of my evenings at community meetings or civic associations, and I've seen so many of you preaching the gospel that is so important. And as a result, we've seen neighborhood associations, ward committees, civic groups write letters of support. And I think it really runs counter to some of the concern around this bill that we couldn't educate people in time. That's bunk. Of course we could, and we have, and we are, and we're going to continue to do that. I've said this many times, so apologies if I'm becoming repetitive, but you know, I consider myself an optimist, and while I would venture a guess all of you were devastated when this president decided to join 2 other countries across the world in pulling out of the Paris Accord, and he made some offhand quip saying, I was elected by the people of Pittsburgh, not Paris. Well, almost directly after, a fellow named Bill Peduto, who's the mayor of Pittsburgh, entered his own climate agreement with Anne Hidalgo, who is the mayor of Paris, which is just one other example where cities are leading, and by God, Boston has to lead. We've done some good things. I'm not giving any short shrift to what we've done, but there's a heck of a lot more that we can do and we should do and we ought to be doing right now, and this is such a crucial part. So I'm delighted to partner with my friend, with my colleague, Michelle Wu, in pushing this, as well as the plastic bag ordinance, as well as net zero carbon, as well as preparedness, as well as a whole host of issues on charging stations, it goes, you know, and so on and so forth. And we're going to continue to push this. I think a vote will happen soon. I hope a vote will happen soon. And we are just going to continue to talk to our colleagues. We ask you to continue to talk to our colleagues, some who were here, some who weren't here, obviously the mayor as well. But this is something that really is going to have a profound impact for generations to come. And at the same time, there are protections in place to protect ratepayers. It's a no-brainer in my regard and in my book. And again, we would not get to this point with all this support, but for each and every one of you and the people who aren't in this room right now, who've been such a integral part of this coalition. And I'm profoundly grateful. Now we got to get this passed. We got to get this signed. We got to get this put into practice. So thank you very much. Closing thoughts. Cass, any thoughts?
Ditto to everything that Councillor O'Malley said. Just so proud to be part of this coalition. You all have really taken it to every organization, every corner of the city, and it's an incredibly complicated topic that everyone has managed to distill down into not just kind of more simple language that you can understand, but the real values underneath all of these terms. And I think that's how we need to be guiding public policy overall in our country, in our city, because the way that these corporate interests often play is that, you know, throwing out the complicated jargon, saying we're not, you know, you can't possibly understand the economic impacts and costs, you know, hidden cost issues of what will happen if we change the policies, wanting to further kind of the same economic structures that have been in place. But when we engage community, when we put it in terms that people understand and care about, it makes a huge difference. So you all have done this in such a short time period. I'm really, really excited. Thank you. Thank you.
Here, here. Thank you. Clap for yourselves now. Well deserved. All right, so this hearing is hereby adjourned. Thank you all. We will be in touch.